Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to Icarus, episode 4, and today's build has been by far my favorite thing to build in this project so far, hands down. I had a ton of fun making this, and I've been looking forward to showing you all for quite some time now, but of course we're pretty far ahead now in this project, so I've been kind of holding off, but I've been looking forward to showing you this. So this is going to be a study, like I guess a study room, so like a big library and some, fireplaces and some seating and all that good stuff. Something that I think that no good mansion or castle would go without, so we'll be doing this in this lower floor, and it's kind of perfect because we needed a room that wasn't going to have a whole lot of windows because we're going to have lots of parts of the building on top of this and lots of parts of the building on the outside of this. This is a very interior room, so I wanted to have this thing totally walled off, like almost like a dungeon. It's not really a dungeon. It's going to look very, warm and cozy, but it's very walled off, so I wanted something that would work in that respect, and this was pretty much perfect. So to start off, I wanted to design some different components we could use for our study. Of course, there really aren't a whole lot of pieces in our building set that we can use to create a study. In fact, there's really none at all. I think almost everything that's used in this build will be made out of smaller objects and sort of forced in using different themes and whatnot, which I think is always the funnest way to build in this game. So that's a recipe for a lot of fun, obviously. So we're starting off with a bookshelf, and this is something that I mentioned a bit in the last episode, but one of the bigger challenges with working with all these wood pieces is while you can kind of get the colors correct, it's not quite always the same. It seems like the specular maps and the reflections and everything about these different wood pieces are slightly varying, and what that means is you can't really always have the right matched color. So I tried to use a lot of the same pieces for different things that should be made out of the same kind of wood. So really the only exception to this is I used like the regular wood planks for the shelving, and then I also used the regular wood planks to do some trim and stuff in the actual room. But other than that, I'm using the same trim pieces that you saw earlier anyway, to create almost everything else in this room. It's wooden, so all the shelves, all of the trim pieces, all that stuff is all made out of the same piece. So that was kind of interesting because it was a little weird to use the same piece in so many different ways, but it was a lot of fun in the same respect. So you can see right now that we're making some books for our bookshelves, and this part I think was probably the part that really made this whole study. Like if we didn't have a good bookshelf, then everything else would kind of fall flat. So I played around with some different objects that could be books, and I've seen this done a few times, but I never really saw it with these pieces in particular. I have seen people use like the primitive pieces, which are a little bit too shiny. I think they're just not really book-like. They kind of look like they're shiny laminate cases or something. But the nice thing about these little wooden angle brackets is they've got this really rough kind of interesting texture on their end pieces, and there's so many different angle brackets with different textures on them that I thought, okay, well, if we could just rotate them in the right way, we can create book looking kind of clusters. And the thing about them obviously is they're angle brackets, so they're going to have the other half of the bracket on the back side. So we had to go in and make sure that all of the books on the right side of a cluster were having their angle brackets pointed to the left, and vice versa for the left side books. And then you could kind of create a cluster where all the angles of the brackets are pointing inwards towards the middle of the cluster, and from the outside it just looks like a bunch of books, which is pretty awesome. So I made a bunch of those little book clusters, and then you saw a minute ago that I threw them all into our bookshelves, and I made I think like 3 different variants of this bookshelf. So we got like a really densely populated bookshelf full of books. We've got like a slightly less dense one, which is we're placing that one right now. It's got some different little pieces on it as well, like some pots and stuff. And we also have this really scarce bookshelf that is almost empty, which I think is kind of nice for variety in our study over here. So once we had these bookshelves down, I really started to feel like this could come together and look nice. But it was a little challenging because, again, we only really have this bookshelf to work with, and visualizing how this whole place is going to be laid out in the end was a little bit difficult because I really didn't know what else we were going to be putting in here. All I knew was I wanted to have the bookshelves, and I wanted to have this fireplace here in the middle. So with those two things in mind, I think starting off with the fireplace was the right way to go, because now I've got a bit of a grasp of what the scale of this room is going to look like. And I did try and incorporate some of this orange brick again like we had from our exterior, which is kind of nice, and it just so happens to be a really great color too for a fireplace. Not quite your standard, rectangular brick, but a nice orange brick that sort of complements the wood colors nicely, so that's good. I also used a lot of these little, I guess they're chimneys in the game, but they kind of look like pillars. I used these to shape the backside of our fireplace. And of course, we got these beautiful fire VFX we can use to create the fireplace itself. So the whole thing looks nice when it's all done, which is awesome as well. For the detailing, I used these, well, these are supposed to be like wooden beams, but to me they look more like metal beams. They're really shiny and have kind of an odd texture to them. So I don't really know why they're even considered wooden beams. They look much more like metal, but I used that. We got a little mantle here as well out of the same wood trim piece. And the nice thing about that wood trim piece is there's actually 3 different objects in the same set that are all made out of the same texture and they're the exact same color, but they are, all trim pieces that have a little bit of variety to them. So the combination of those 3 trim pieces really brings this whole room together because we don't have to worry about having varying textures too much. We can use all these 3 different types and sort of rotate them in different ways and use either the back sides of them as flat wood or the edges of them for this mantle in this case, or even the entire piece together as like a trim piece. So very versatile pieces that I wasn't really expecting to work out as well as they did. Now, this part's pretty interesting. This is right whenever our fireworks update came out, which of course includes the billboards. So I thought, all right, well, we need some sort of wallpaper that's going to fit in our study. And what better way to do that than to use the billboards? So I came up with this little like green kind of wallpapery texture, and it was really hit or miss, to be honest. I mean, the thing about these billboards, and I know they've been mentioned plenty of times in other videos, and people like Rudy and Silver have been touching on this quite a bit, but they don't have their own specular maps. They're just like a standard flat texture. So if you're placing these outside, they become apparent very quickly, or it becomes apparent very quickly that they're just like flat textures, and there really isn't a lot of dynamic stuff going on in the lighting, which kind of sucks. It's a bummer that you can't really have like custom specular maps. In fact, I think personally, if Frontier added in an option to add not only a billboard texture, but also a billboard specular map, that would be amazing, but I don't really see that happening because, like, when someone who's maybe more of a casual player of this game sees that, it's like, wait, why would I need to add, what's a specular map? Like, what, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have that from a player's perspective. It's more like a tool that, a creator, an asset creator would work with. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have that on the front end of the game. So I kind of understand that, but at the same time, it'd be awesome if they added that. I know they probably won't, but it'd be amazing if they did. And for those of you who don't really know what I'm talking about, the specular map is just it's the map that goes on the texture that basically defines how the lighting is going to hit the object. So for example, there's like bricks, in the game. So like the brick wall, you can see it right now, actually, the brick wall right there, it's got like little shadows where the bricks kind of have crevices, and that's all defined by the specular map. So when the light hits at different angles, it looks like the bricks are actually bricks and not just, a texture of brick with light on it. And the billboards don't do that. So we have to work with what we have, and you can't really add specular maps to billboards. But the nice thing about this build is the whole thing is indoors, and it doesn't even have any windows. There's actually one window in this whole room, so the lighting won't really affect these walls very much, and that kind of makes them nice candidates for the custom billboards. All right, so moving on to the next part of this build, another thing that I really did not know if it was going to work out early on was the idea to build some sort of like couch or seating element for our study room. Now, obviously we don't have any couch pieces in our current piece set, so that meant we had to use something different to kind of replace that. And I really wanted to try this, even though I knew it was going to be kind of weird, and I knew that it was likely not going to be, exactly how I want it. But I looked at the different pieces, and it was hard to really come up with a good couch design. But I think in the end, the best way to go was to try and choose a leather couch and then recreate sort of like a minimalist leather couch out of the different primitive pieces. And to be honest, I think it turned out kind of nice. I mean, there are some sort of rough pieces, and I tried to cover up all of the seams and everything with, other pieces. And I, of course, also used those little, I think they're like billboard stands or something that came with the new update to have some legs on these as well. And, they're pretty good for what we have. Obviously, we don't have any sort of pieces to work with beyond this, so it's pretty much the best we can get. But I think in the end they're pretty convincing. They look a lot like couches, leather couches, which is awesome because we really need some sort of couch feature for this study. So it feels nice and cozy, like a place you go hang out and read books or whatever, especially around the fireplace. So this is that final result. Now I also wanted to have some coffee tables and even some side tables. So I went in after this and looked around, and it was really more about finding the right texture than anything. I didn't want to have pieces that felt too mismatchy, and I wanted something kind of nice and wooden, but it felt kind of finished like an actual coffee table would. So I ended up settling on these kind of weird pieces. I think that they're supposed to be like, I don't even know. Maybe they're like benches or something, but they're down here at the bottom. You'll see them in just a minute here. Here we go. I think they're just, I think they're actually walls, what they are. But anyway, I kind of folded them into each other and created a coffee table out of them. And I just love the look of this texture. Like, it looks like an actual finished table, which is awesome. So here's our coffee table. And then I also went in and made a little side table, which I think could also sort of fit in as like an ottoman or something. I don't really know. But I think the side table was the best bet for this one. And again, out of the same texture, which is awesome. So it all matches. And really, I just want to talk a bit about the way that I'm going about doing this whole thing. I think it's kind of becoming apparent now what I'm doing, but going into this, especially going into something where you don't have any pieces to work with in the game already, the idea of making a study was kind of abstract because I didn't have any pieces to reference. I didn't really know like what I wanted the room to be laid out like or where things were going to go. And it was really hard to get a grasp on what the final result would look like because I just had no idea what I was going to use to make each piece. So I kind of just started off one by one, and I found pieces that I thought were going to be essential to, creating this study environment. So obviously the bookshelf was like number one, get a good bookshelf going. And then from there it was like, all right, get a good fireplace going, get some good furniture going. And then once you have these pieces, then all of a sudden it starts to come together, and now you have like physical pieces in front of you that you can copy and you can move around and you can sort of get an idea of what the space is going to look like. And then that was sort of the process for the rest of this build. So once I had some different pieces down, I was like, all right, what else would I see in a study? And then create some more piece sets and then add those piece sets in and sort of just build up from there until we had the finished study. And it was a lot of layering, and you're going to see we're not even, we're about halfway done based on the episode length, but we're about halfway done, and it does look like it's almost done, but there's just a ton of things we're going to keep layering until the whole place really looks like a convincing study. So you'll notice that pattern kind of in and out, but I want to talk about that just a little bit. I did also add in these cool little things here. Just some drawings. They're actually, I think they're Da Vinci's drawings, like these wing designs, but I just thought it was kind of fitting with the theme, obviously, the Icarus theme, to have some like old, wing concept art that, you would have for some human flight in the far future, I guess, based on that design. But I thought that was kind of a cool idea. Anyway, I don't know. But moving on, now that we have our living room sort of planned out, I started thinking about the rest of the space and how I wanted to do it. And here's where the bookshelves came into play again. So I thought, all right, well, I think I want to section this area off because this place where I'm putting the wall right now is really just like an empty area. And I thought about doing like a fountain or, maybe some foliage elements or something, but it didn't really seem like it would fit. And I wanted it to be very, very, cozy. So I wanted to have just like very closed off walls and very tight, narrow kind of areas. So the wall was a perfect bet for this. And it's nice that it all fit very cleanly in here. And once I put these down, I started to realize, because I had to, of course, get a little creative with the siding because I didn't really detail the sides of the bookshelves. So now we have like, weird sides. So I, again, use the same wooden pieces to keep the same texture going. And once I started playing with this, that's when I realized that we could do a lot more with the sidings than I initially kind of expected. Like you can use two of them to create this little narrow kind of almost like a doorway, but with no door, just like a little kind of corridor thing. And then I started using this wooden post, which also has the same wooden texture, to level out the top and connect the top piece. And this is about when I realized that we can actually use these wooden trim pieces to pretty much cover up the whole top above the bookshelves as well. And I was sort of on the fence about covering up the wallpaper again, because it was like, all right, well, we did do a lot of work on this wallpaper, but it is still exposed in some areas. But I think that having this full wooden paneling above the bookshelves really nails down that study look. So that's what I went with, and this is when things really take off, because we're going to have just like a ton of wood textures everywhere, and I just love this final look. Like, it really does feel to me like an old school study with just like insane wood paneling and detailing like everywhere. Like, you walk into one of those things and it feels just super cozy, and there's so many different details everywhere all over the wood, and it like creates kind of like a sound dampening almost. So the whole room just feels really nice. So that was kind of the end goal of this whole thing. And as we continue with this wooden paneling, you'll see just how much of that is going to come into play. And it also kind of sectioned off this other side here, which of course is just a queue, but I kind of imagine this to be like an extension of the library. So you got the main study room, and then the extension with some showcase of maybe some collections that this person happens to have or whatever. But I just thought an extensive library study was a really good addition to our castle sort of mansion type thing. And this all kind of brings it back to what I was saying earlier about layering things on. When I look at the final result of this thing, there's really no way that I would have been able to picture this in my mind, because, all of these things we're using, especially the bookshelves and the custom pieces, I had no idea I was going to be able to create these. I didn't know what they were going to look like or where they were going to go. So it was sort of a daunting task, just kind of like thinking, how am I going to create this study if I don't have any of the pieces yet, and, where's everything going to go? And I really think that the method of just starting with the basics and then layering and then adding new things and then layering is really the way to go. And, you can always go back if you don't like something you did or you don't like a particular design, but this was definitely a really nice way to overcome sort of a block in the design. So hopefully this is a method at least that I'm going to use again for future projects where we're doing something again that's sort of out of theme. It's not really a part of the current piece sets, and it makes it easier to go about, I guess, creating something like this when you don't have all the objects in front of you. Now, this little area over here was kind of weird, actually. I didn't really have like anything to do with it because it was too narrow for an actual walkway, but I liked it as kind of like a window to the other room, so I wanted to make sure we kept it open air. And then I thought, all right, well, this is about the time when we should have some foliage, because it is very wooden, and I think that having some, modest foliage here and there would be a nice way to bring some green into this room. So I thought a cactus is a very modest, piece of foliage, I guess. You'd expect to see something like that in some sort of study. So we got a nice cactus and a little kind of rock pile there. And that pretty much wrapped that area up, I guess. I thought there was more to that than that, but that's pretty much it. And a lot of this is then just going to be kind of covering some seams and connecting this whole room to the rest of the building. And more importantly, thinking about how we're going to do the roof of this building, because that was another kind of odd challenge. And the nice thing about this actual, area is that it's going to be completely covered on the top by more buildings. So we can totally clip stuff through it, and the height isn't a factor. We can make it go as tall as we want. So building the roof was actually a lot of fun. And surprisingly, I was a little worried about it at first, but it ended up being a ton of fun to do. So I started off with just like a basic shape. Again, doing it similar to the flooring that we did in the first episode. So start with a tile piece, and then we'll go ahead and attach stuff to the bottom of it. But I want it to be tileable so we can just, copy paste it all over the top of the roof. And something that I noticed about almost all of these old school studies is that if they're going to have this like wood trim everywhere, then they're almost certainly going to have sort of like a square wooden pattern on the top, on the roof, where you've got like big beams and then some trim on the beams and then like some nice wooden paneling right underneath that. So that was the design we went for. And the biggest challenge here was not clipping and disrupting the flow of the design we had for the trim. So you can see, even at this higher height, I'm having a hard time placing these, because on the inside, it looks as if it's clipping into the our fireplace and, creating some weird angles and stuff. So what I did off camera, and I totally cut this whole thing out because it took me forever, but is I added a whole other layer of like a thick wooden beam on top of our trim by just like rotating the trim and using the backside of it. And that gave us just enough height that these big wooden supports that are kind of coming into our fireplace are high enough that they're not going into the big artwork there on the side, the big wing design thing. And with a little bit of trim work and stuff, we could kind of make it seem as if all of this stuff is connected nicely and it's not just like weird beams clipping into our fireplace, which I think was nice in the end, although it was a bit of a pain to, plan all my stuff out. But in the end, it was nice. And I think these trim pieces are, again, super versatile, so it makes it really easy to make it appear as if all of these things are attached properly and being used correctly and all that good stuff. But moving on from here, we really don't have much else to do. I think we're pretty much at the end. The only other thing that I wanted to add in was some lighting, and this actually ended up being the most important part, so I'm sure I'll show at least a little bit of this at the end, although I do have something to say about that before we get into it. I'm running an SLI setup, so I have two 970s that are running together to run this game, and the game doesn't actually officially support SLI, so I have like a custom profile setup with the NVIDIA inspector or whatever, and it actually does really well. Like, I have optimization to the point where both my GPUs get used like almost exactly the same, which is awesome. So I can get like really great frame rate, which is amazing. Like, I didn't expect this to work as well as it did. The only weird thing is that at nighttime, which you're seeing right now, there's a little bit of a lighting glitch where the specular map for any object at night is just like the default as it is during the day. So you'll notice that everything that's like where I'm, shining it against the moon or something becomes like super bright and it looks super weird. So basically this entire room just like looks way too lit up. It's not dark enough, and it should be way darker. There's no real moon exposure. So I'm just doing it anyway from the SLI perspective because it was, better frame rate and it was actually easier to see everything. So no complaints there. But when I disable SLI and I take it back to the default, then you'll be able to see the game as it should be with the proper darkness in this room. And I really wanted it to be like a nice kind of mood lighting, like very, very dimly lit with these, little lights here are going to be much dimmer actually in reality. They're just enough light to kind of light up the bookcases, but I wanted to make sure that the fireplace was by far the brightest light in the whole room. But looking at the time here, we pretty much are at the end of this episode, so I hope you all enjoyed. I'm going to leave you with some cinematic shots without the SLI enabled so you can see the full darkness, but as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.